Thank you, Todd. Thank you for each of y'all for sticking with it till the end. I know there's a temptation to cut out. We're all busy, but this last session for me was the highlight, the culmination. I enjoyed it as much as anything, and it was very useful and stimulating to me. Just a few closing comments before we depart. I mentioned it yesterday that Aldo Leopold said that the urge to comprehend must precede the urge to reform. And I think we all can understand that truth. And so the purpose of this symposium, one of the purposes was, as I tried to point out, is to think about cedar, to think about juniper. And we've been given a lot of food for thought the last couple days. And I do believe that for me, my comprehension of cedar has increased. And so it's time well spent for me. I learned some things, and it's going to help me in my work. So from my perspective, it was a successful symposium. All of our questions were not answered. I cannot answer all of the questions I posed yesterday, but as we think about those things and digest what we heard, we're going to be further along than we were. Leopold also said that conservationists are notorious for their dissensions. Isn't that true? There's a lot of different conservation perspectives, and it's not that we're enemies. It's not one against the other. It's that there's dissensions, there's differences, there's honest differences of opinion. And that's especially true with cedar and juniper. Leopold did not say that those dissensions are bad. In fact, they're probably healthy. We don't all need to be exactly saying the same thing because every piece of land is different. Every acre on every piece of land is different. Every person has different perspectives and goals and objectives and desires. So it's okay that we have differences. And even if, and we're not enemies, but it's okay that we have different perspectives, so that we don't need to frown upon that there's some disagreements out there. I need to hear other perspectives. You need to hear other perspectives. I mentioned that we all have our own biases, and it's good that we acknowledge our own biases, and we all have them. Don't try to say we don't, but I'll say one of my biases is that I have a very strong, place a high value on private lands stewardship. That's just been what I've done, so that's kind of the place I come from. The idea of stewardship is being, Rachel mentioned it, or someone mentioned it, a love for the land and a desire to be a voluntary caretaker and having that internal sense of obligation and responsibility. It's not the government's responsibility to come out and do your projects. It's your responsibility. If they offer help, that's great, but take the responsibility for your own actions on your piece of land. Get the best advice you can, realizing that there are differences, and we're not on the same page yet, and we may not ever be. So just to encourage and instill that idea of loving the land, connecting yourself with the land, you're being grafted into the land where you're a part of the land is a part of you, and your knowledge and expertise is going to grow. You need to be the best expert on your piece of land that there is. Not the agent, not the biologist. The landowner needs to become the best expert on their piece of land. So I want to ask, how many in this room do any kind of landowner advisory work? Whether it's full-time or part-time, raise your hand good and high. So it's a pretty good chunk. And that's frankly, that's kind of what we targeted here. Train the trainer. And so I'm going to speak to you right now specifically. So what is needed for you and I to do that job effectively? I want to summarize at least some of the high points of what I think I've learned over my 48 years of doing this. And number one, of course, yes, we need to have knowledge. We need to have the technical expertise and the knowledge of soil, water, plants, animals, ecology. Yes, we must have that. There's no substitute for that. You have to know your business. But that may not be the most important thing. And we're not taught these other things. You have to learn them by the school of hard knocks. But you and I, in addition to the knowledge and the expertise that we might bring, we have to come to a landowner with a sense of humility, that we don't have all the answers. Don't pretend you do, with a sense of humility toward the land. Respecting each and every landowner that you work with, even though you may not agree with them. Respect them. Treat them like a human being, like you want to be treated. Not with, I'm going to give you all the answers because I'm the smart guy. That does not translate very well. So a sense of humility, respecting the people from where they're coming from. Listen to that landowner. Listen, engage them in conversation. It's no different than a courting relationship. You didn't marry your spouse after the first date, more than likely. You built that relationship over time, and you listened, and you talked, and you tried to get their perspective. So developing a relationship with landowners, I would say, rises to the very top. It's even more important than your technical and expertise and knowledge, because that's where you're going to earn their respect. That's where you're going to, they're going to actually listen to you after you've spent the time listening to them. And we have to remember that the right answers, they change over time. The right answers about juniper were different 40, 50 years ago. And the answers that we may think we're developing now, they may be different 30 or 40, 50 years from now. So the science is evolving, our understanding is evolving, and we should never come to the point where we think, okay, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about cedar, and this is how you do it, because that's just not the way that we work. We only have a partial understanding. We do the best we can, but the right answers are changing, and we want to keep up with the best science for sure, but don't get locked in to thinking that this is the right way to manage cedar. The right way to manage land there's a large amount of variation in latitude, not this much latitude. This much latitude is good stewardship, good conservation, sustainable ecological management, whatever you want to call it. Land management is not rocket science. It's much more complex than that. Seriously. The biology, the chemistry, the physics, the human relationships, yeah, it is more complex than the most complicated rocket science that there is. And so it's a huge responsibility for the landowner, but for the person who advises the landowner, it's a huge responsibility. And so take that responsibility seriously, whether you're a landowner or advisor. What you're doing when we advise a landowner, in a sense, even a small property now is worth $1 million, and a modest sized property is worth 10 or 20 $1 million. The advice that we give has the potential to either enhance or diminish the value of that property, and that's a huge responsibility. So we want to be on solid ground when we do that. It's complex. We should never, ever try to oversimplify it with a brochure or with bullet points or, best management practices. Here's what you need to do, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not how the land works. That's not how nature works. It's okay to do some of that, but realizing that there's a large variation in what is good stewardship and good conservation. It is easy to get discouraged when we drive up and down the roads, in the country roads. We see some poor management. It's no secret. And I get asked this question a lot: are things getting any better after all of the biologists and the conservationists and the consultants, all this work that's been offered over decades and decades? Has it made a difference? And I can come to you saying, I think it has. I think that Everest Plateau, the hill country, is in better ecological shape now than it was when I started working. Yeah, there's still issues, there's still problems. Fragmentation's going to get worse. We know that. It's not debatable. But I see reason to be encouraged. I see people who love the land, are committed to the land, are learning about the land. And frankly, what landowners have taught me is the basis of what I teach other landowners. It's not that I'm so smart that I learned so much good stuff in a symposium or a class, but what I learned from one landowner, I can multiply that and pass it on to another. So you guys, you landowners, are important to us, teaching us what you have seen, what you have observed. So as advisors, we need to be willing to acknowledge that that landowner knows that piece of land better than we ever will, and we can learn a lot if we just will. So I see a reason for optimism. I think the hill country is moving in a good direction in some senses, as far as stability and the water cycle and ecological diversity. And so I want to leave you at least with my perception that things are getting better, may not as fast as what we'd like, but we're dealing with people. We're not dealing with just inanimate projects, and progress is slow, can be very slow. So I want to thank each of you again for enduring to the end, for being an engaged group, for asking really good questions. I wish my hearing was good enough to hear all of it, but I'm going to take advantage of the recordings. And thank you again. Let's keep thinking. Let's keep thinking about Cedar. Let's keep an open mind. Let's try to become the best knowledge that we can gain. And then if we advise landowners to do so with humility and respect and learning from them, learning from each other. So that just concludes what kind of my overview of this session, which I enjoyed very much. And I think I was told that we're just going to go ahead and dismiss now. So drive safely, and on your way back, think about Cedar.